Hello and welcome to Unhacked. I'm Brian Graff, Senior Vice President of Business Development here at Abacode. We're here every week to take you through the cyber topic of the week. We will cover the most recent attacks and security events and provide you with tips to help prevent the hack from happening to you. So this is part 2 of our executive order episode on Unhacked. So earlier in May, the President released an executive order discussing new cybersecurity directives in the wake of the onslaught of attacks on our infrastructure by hacking groups supported by state agencies. And here's a continuation of the main points from that executive order. The executive order requires the creation of an agency review board like the NTSB, which is the National Transportation Safety Board. What that board does is review accidents that occur, like plane crashes, train accidents, things like that. They perform investigations and provide recommendations to the industry and the organization that caused that attack. They investigate major accidents and issue recommendations to the organization and the industry to prevent future incidents from occurring. The same will now be done with cybersecurity attacks with this new review board. And like we said in the earlier episode of Unhacked, now organizations are going to be required to report when a cybersecurity attack occurs, not just when a data breach occurs, but if ransomware affects critical infrastructure, they're going to have to report that occurred. The next topic from the executive order is the standardizing of the incident detection, response, and remediation playbooks that are currently floating around the federal agencies. So as of today, federal agencies have collaborated in some instances to create interagency incident detection and response playbooks. However, many agencies still run off of their own playbooks. The process is not standardized, and more than likely, attacks now are going to involve more than one agency, more than one business provider, as you saw with the SolarWinds attack that not only involved SolarWinds, but the third party that was involved in the malicious uploading of that code payload, all of the vendors downstream from SolarWinds that were affected, and the end users that were affected, along with the government agencies. So these hacks are going to get more and more sophisticated, and they're going to involve more and more organizations. So standardization of the response process is completely vital. Everyone needs to be on the same page from minute one. The first day, the first 12 hours, 24 hours of incident response is the most important. It determines how quickly you can stop the attack from propagating and how quickly you can resume services based on your restoration processes. So standardizing first the detection process to make sure that all organizations, agencies, and the vendors that supply them are equipped with incident reporting and detection tools. And that includes personnel, processes, and technology that can correlate security incidents and create alerts based on threat intelligence and security logs. The second part of that executive order is the response capability. So once an incident is detected, there should be run books for different types of incidents, meaning a breach is not going to have the exact same response as a physical attack or a physical incident, or the accidental erasure or loss of data. All of these incidents are required to be responded to, and are going to be responded to by the same team, but there might be different steps involved in responding and remediating those incidents. And finally, remediation. How do we resume function once the attack has occurred? As you saw with Colonial Pipeline, if infrastructure doesn't have appropriate incident response and business continuity and disaster recovery functions, a critical infrastructure could be knocked out for several days. And if Colonial Pipeline had occurred in conjunction with other attacks, the effects could have been catastrophic. So the federal government is now seeing that it's not enough to just put in a cybersecurity program and detect incidents and be able to prevent the most common incidents from occurring with the vulnerability management program and security monitoring and incident response. But we have to be prepared for once the attack does cause damage, how do we restore these services as quickly as possible? Because there can be real loss of life if these real world services are not instituted and resumed quickly. We have gotten lucky that hackers have not targeted infrastructure that would result in major loss of life if these processes were stopped. Hospitals can be shut down, energy services can be disrupted, water services can be disrupted, or even completely made, water sources can be made completely undrinkable if hackers are able to get into treatment plants and dump the wrong chemical in at the wrong time. So these have real world catastrophic effects, and we have to be able to fix the problems once they occur to mitigate the massive loss of life that occur and be able to get these processes resuming and functioning as quickly as possible. So if you've been watching Unhacked, you will start to hear the same directives, the same suggestions, and the same guidelines over and over and over again. And these are reiterated once again in this executive order. There needs to be better vulnerability management. There needs to be better incident detection and response. There needs to be better BCDR processes so that we can resume services once the attack occurs, because you can't prevent every attack from happening. You'll see these guidelines be reiterated over and over again, because these are what is vital to maintain these services in the real world. So if you're an organization that is looking to provide services to federal agency customers, or you are a current vendor of federal agencies, what should you do to make sure that you are on the forefront of complying with these guidelines, so that when you go to sell these services, you are already implemented what federal agencies are looking for? Well, step one is to establish that vulnerability management program. If you haven't already, you need to make sure that you can identify the vulnerabilities, both process and technical, in your current organization and respond to them in a timely manner. And what that means is performing risk assessments, vulnerability assessments, and penetration tests to ensure that you know all the technical vulnerabilities in your network and all the process vulnerabilities in terms of do you have the correct personnel in place? Do you have backup personnel able to resume critical functions if primaries are unavailable? And that's not just personnel, that's facilities as well. We go back to talking about BCDR for plants and facilities. You usually can't just have an extra facility or plant just waiting for failover in case your primary gets hacked. So what can you do to increase the resiliency within your facility and ensure that those attacks do not get to the layer that shuts down the factory or the plant, making sure that vulnerability management program is detecting those vulnerabilities and patching them in a timely manner to reduce the number of incidents you have to deal with. The second part is, along with establishing vulnerability management, applying zero trust to all of your processes and your solutions. What does zero trust mean? That means that any system or solution, third party or internal, is always suspect. So if there is any request to grant access, open up a firewall rule, implement and onboard a new system, a process has to be in place to make sure any security vulnerabilities that change will pose to your network, to your organization, those are dealt with in a timely manner, and those are accepted by your executive management prior to onboarding that service. So again, there should be a risk assessment process that is for the entire organization, and then for each change that occurs, each system that is being introduced to your overall environment, if you're looking to expand your services, what risks do those new services pose? Make sure that your executives and your key stakeholders are always involved in these conversations, so that when something new pops up, everyone who could be affected is in that room or is in that conversation and can say, well, this bad thing could happen if we do this, and that you have the appropriate response to that negative impact. If you develop software, make sure you're doing code reviews, make sure you're doing static code analysis to avoid something like the to avoid something like the SolarWinds hack, you want to make sure that you're not just scanning your networks, but you're scanning your code. You're doing code reviews. You're making sure that every change to your in-house developed code has been authorized. You're monitoring when anyone accesses code and when anyone checks code back in. You should be getting an alert saying, code branch was checked back in. So if you weren't expecting any releases or any development to occur at that time, you know that's probably an unauthorized change. You also want to scan your networks after you make a major change via systems or application code, because you may have introduced a vulnerability inadvertently. You want to make sure you catch it before you go live. So that's the preventative layer, making sure you're reducing the number of incidents that occur as much as possible. But like I said, some incidents will get through no matter how resilient your program is. So how do you respond to those incidents? You have to make sure that program is in place before the incident occurs, obviously. So determining what level of response is needed for each system component, making sure you have an inventory and your most critical systems are at the top, and you know exactly what data is stored on those systems, where that data is backed up, where the system configurations are backed up, and how to stand that service back up, or that system component or that solution, how you restore service and function in that component if that primary goes down. Can you re-image a server, pull files from a snapshot and spin it back up? Then great, okay, then you have that server component covered in your BCDR plan. If it's a solution that requires a lot more man hours and configuration, and it's not just a simple pull a backup and stand up a VM, like a lot of these OT services are a lot more complicated in terms of restoring function. You need to make sure those processes are documented so that somebody can follow it and actually restore that service in the event it goes down. And remember that when things go down, it's probably not because really good things are happening in the world or in the environment. You have to assume that you are going to be having to resume function in a less than optimal environment. Maybe your primary stakeholders and your primary engineers, your primary administrators, maybe they're not available because there's been a natural disaster. Maybe you can't reach them because a hack has brought down communications. So you have to assume that you may not have all of your primary technology, processes, and personnel in place, and who are the backups for each of those components, and how do you resume function if they're not there. Making sure that you have the appropriate bandwidth, that you can you restore services within the appropriate time frame. If you are a manufacturer that requires 24-hour processing and manufacturing, otherwise it's catastrophic to your business and catastrophic to your customers, then you probably need a more resilient incident response plan than, let's say, a custom fabricator that may not have their factories running 24 hours a day as they work on different projects. So you have to determine, using a risk-based approach, what is the catastrophic incidents we have to prevent, and what is the minimum effort we have to put forth to get ready to respond to those incidents, and then respond to them once they occur. What's the level of backups I need to implement? What are the level of hot failover for my IT systems? Do I need that or not? These are decisions you have to make during the risk assessment process to determine the budget, the amount you have to spend in order to implement your security and response program. So that's all we have today. Again, I'm Brian Graff, and this is Unhacked, and we will see you next week.